Hey superstars, welcome to the Get Rich Without Being a Bitch podcast, and I am your host, Vanessa Shaw, for this journey. We're going to be challenging some stereotypes, shattering glass ceilings, really looking at what it takes to live richly and to design a business that's going to support the life that you really want to be living. I'm going to be sharing lots of tips, tools, and strategies along the way, and I can't wait for you to join me on this journey. Hey superstars, welcome back to another episode of Get Rich Without Being a Bitch. Let's dive into a little bit of mindset today. You know, I always love to go there and just examine, where am I limiting myself? Where am I frankly being my best cheerleader, right? Really seeing my own potential and encouraging myself to go there. I think if we're honest, we probably go through all of those, right? But I want you to start to notice for yourself, where do you make a case for your own limitations versus really making a case for your potential? And what do I mean by that? This can be really, really sneaky, and we don't always notice it because the chances are we've said some of these things for a really long time. So possibly we don't even notice it anymore. When we start to make the case for our own limitations, it's essentially that we are using language patterns that are keeping us small, safe, or limited. I love to look at this when I'm out on the tennis court, right? It's been actually a really great experience this summer. It hasn't been so dreadfully scorching hot in Arizona yet, and the mornings have actually still been pretty bearable and actually pretty pleasant. And normally speaking, I'm kind of half dying on the tennis court, right, at this point in the year. And I have to get out there super early. So because the weather's been really supportive, I have been able to do a lot more clinics and work on my game in the off season, so to speak, right? So I'm working on my tennis game. It's my off season. Things will kick back in end of September, October, and we're in leagues, and we actually got into a new league. So we're going up a level, right? There's so many different things here that frankly map into business, because knowing that we got into a new league and we ended up one of them the top place and the other one second place, I know full well, right? There's a big difference between ending the season top and then going into a new league in the next season, frankly, as the newcomers and pretty much bottom, right? And it demands a new version of us to show up. I captain and co-captain these leagues with a really good friend of mine. And, definitely we want to guide our team into hopefully a really great next season. And as I always say to the team as well, I want you to see that you're making progress, because progress in of itself is just super, super motivating when we can notice it and we can build on that. So coming back to my off season, right? I know that, as I say, come the fall, I'm going to be playing a different game. It's going to require a different version of me to show up on the tennis court. I need different tools in my toolkit. And I've been able to do a lot of clinics working with my pro on my game and really getting her to push me. And it's been fascinating because, of course, she sees where my patterns are at and she sees my strengths and those weaknesses. And frankly, she sees some of those things that I'm not even doing yet, even though my game, could look pretty good. She's like, you're going to be competing at the next level. There are some things that you now need to start doing. You've got to add them into your repertoire and into your toolkit so that you have more at your disposal. And I really think about that, right? As we go up the levels in business, I don't think we think about that enough, of how we need to equip ourselves with a more expanded mindset, with new tools, with different things, and frankly, let go of some of the things that we were doing at the lower levels that no longer serve us. So coming back to tennis, because I love being there for a bit, right? I start to notice where am I making a case for my limitations, right? Where am I making a case for my limitations? So my pro has been really wanting me to work on slicing and drop shots. Now, they haven't been in my toolkit, or they have been, but very sporadically. And when the stress is on and the pressure is on, they are not going to be my go-to. So she's like, yeah, that's why you have to work on them now, because you've got to build the practice in so that when you are in a situation and you recognize that it's the appropriate tool, you've done enough practice to be able to use it, right? I started to notice my language. I can't do that. This is so hard. I've never sliced before. Oh my gosh, my ball goes too high. All of these things, right? This is where I start to make the case for my limitations. Versus, I know I'm going to get this down. I know I've come this far. This is just a skill set. This is a technique. I know that with enough practice, I'm going to nail this, right? So I started to even notice like my own language patterns. And it's like, this is crazy. By the way, side note, this is why I love having a practice that's so physical, like something like tennis. Some of you might be lifting weights or something where you move your body, because you will notice how these things show up for you through your physical practice, and you will be able to map typically very similar patterns back to your business, or frankly, tap into things that could be really helpful, right? What if I approached my business in the way that I approach strength training, for example? So that's just a nice little side note there. So yes, coming back to, right, those limitations, and we start to see it in language, and then we start to see it through our behavior, where that opportunity comes to practice the new tool or the technique, and I back off, right? So of course, that happens a lot of times because that's been the former way that I was approaching the game, until all of a sudden it's like, no, I'm going to start to really speak to my potential here and start to frankly celebrate the places where I move outside of my comfort zone, where it feels like previously I would have never got that ball. Previously, I would have never stretched that far. Previously, I would have never run that way. Previously, I would have never done this, but now I'm going to go for it, right? So I might not succeed, but I'm definitely going into my potential as opposed to just immediately limiting myself. And here's the thing, when we speak to our limitations, and you'll start to notice this for yourself if you pay attention, you will certainly start to notice it with other people. It sounds like I am fill in the blank, not good at. I've never been good at this. I can't, right? It's an I statement followed up by a language pattern that limits. And what it does is it also puts us in like this identity. I'm not somebody that does that, right? So if we go back to, if I think about tennis and how my tennis game has evolved, in the early days when I was starting out, and for any of you that know tennis, I played doubles. I'd love to be playing more singles, but doubles is a game where most winning points are won at the net. But in my early days of playing tennis, it felt dangerous and scary to be that close to the net when there's an opponent on the other side hitting balls at you, right? So now I have to learn the skills and the techniques to not be so scared of that, right? And to be able to place the balls well. So in the early days, I used to say things like, oh, I don't like coming into the net. That's not for me. I'm not a net player, right? Again, arguing for my limitations. I love to hit on the baseline. Well, of course, Vanessa, you love to hit on the baseline because it feels really safe, okay? You're a long way away from everything. But so those language patterns. Whereas now, and I'll even hear other peers or even my coaches say this, Vanessa, you're coming to the net. You're so strong at the net. You're a great net player. See how that language pattern has shifted, right? The language of it has really shifted. So I now see myself as somebody that A, is capable of doing that, and B, actually I recognize myself doing it pretty consistently as well. Right? This is how we start to shift. So we notice where we're limiting ourselves. Then we have to start to notice like the behaviors that are linked to it, and then stretch outside of our comfort zones and be willing to experiment with something different so that we can get our game. And in this case, it's the game of business and the game of growing your firm and taking it to that next level. So I'd encourage you to really pay attention. If you've got kids, especially younger kids, this is something where I love to practice, right? I've always coached my kids, helped them with different tools. Kids are great for noticing these things and honestly for practicing a different style of leadership, right? If you start to notice your little one that's like, but I can't do that, right? We start to, oh, that's interesting. What makes you say that? I wonder how we could change this. What if we could do it differently, right? Start to give them the tools. You will notice, say, your own language patterns. Perhaps you start to notice it in your team as well. One of my clients recently, she said to me just in closing, I'm smiling. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see me smiling because she knows that there's something that I've done for years to correct language patterns in myself and in clients. And she was kind of rewarding me or, congratulating me recently. She said, Vanessa, I barely ever notice that you say that anymore. Like, way to go. Like, you've worked on this for so long and now it's so ingrained in us. But it was a language pattern that was limiting. And it used to be how it started was instead of saying and, it would become this but, I can't do this, but I'll try, right? And then we start to add in, instead of a but, we start to put in an and, right? It's this can feel difficult and I'm willing to give it a go, right? So we start to build on something. You see how that's different? It's so nuanced in its one word, one 3-letter word that we switch out with another one. And yet it makes an energetic shift. It opens up possibilities. And now we're more into the language of potential than speaking to our limitations. So even that one, I would note, I'd recommend that you start to pay attention to it for yourself. Where is it that you start to really put those buts in the way? And now you're, limiting, and you can replace it with an and how does that shift for you? As always, superstars, I love to hear from you. What resonates? What are you working on? Where do you build the case too strongly at times, perhaps for your limitations? And you need to shift some language and some thought patterns and really start tapping into, that language of potential. As always, can't wait to catch you on the next episode.